Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1937 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Luise Rainer won for her performance in The Good Earth. But why did she beat fellow nominees Irene Dunne, Greta Garbo, Janet Gaynor, and Barbara Stanwyck? We'll explore all this and more on today's episode of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 10th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1937. We'll be discussing why Luise Rainer won again, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is the co-host of one of my favorite Oscar-themed podcasts, Oscar Wilde. She's been heard before on this show on a bonus episode, but here she is making her main show debut today. Please welcome to the show, Sophia Ciminello.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. I wish I could be here, walking in a fur coat like Irene Dunne in The Awful Truth, because that's how I feel. Yeah. I'm just so excited to talk about this year and what was just an absolutely wild year at the Oscars.
Yes, absolutely. And I can't wait to accidentally fall off my chair at one point.
I love it.
Yes. All right. Well, before we discuss 1937, let's have a little chat about Best Actress as a category. Let the audience know a little more about you. What is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
This was incredibly hard for me because, I looked at my list and I tried to come up with something really creative, I think, because my answer is a little standard, but ultimately I had to go with my true winner, and that is Vivien Leigh in A Streetcar Named Desire, playing Blanche Dubois. I just think that this is a transcendent role for her. She has an acting style that almost makes it feel like she's method in this role, even though she has this more classical style, going alongside her co-stars who are much more modern, acting under Strasberg. And I think, too, thinking about her battle that we know now with mental illness, that adds another layer to it and makes it just that much more hard-hitting. So I love her in Gone with the Wind, too, but I had to pick this one.
That is an excellent choice. It's actually not it hasn't been chosen that much so far. I know you've only heard, as of this recording, 2 episodes that have come out, so it's actually kind of rare that someone says Vivien Leigh, which sort of surprised me, but is very deserving. I'm very much team Vivien Leigh in both of her wins, actually. So
great. I love to hear that.
Yes, but there's always the opposite side of it. My other question, because, we love a good winner, but we also love to grieve the loss of our faves. Mm-hmm. So what is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
So naturally, I have a few ways to answer this question. So I'll start with just 2 of my favorite performances that didn't win, but lost to really capable competitors. Those are Celia Johnson for Brief Encounter and Mary Tyler Moore for Ordinary People. Losing to Olivia de Havilland and to Sissy Spacek, I can't begrudge the Academy for choosing them instead, but I just wanted to shout out those performances. I also, I think, really recently have gotten upset when the Academy will kind of go for the, American It girl when they have the opportunity to do something that's really cool. So 2 examples I have there. One is going to get me in trouble, I know. I am not a fan of Jennifer Lawrence's Silver Linings Playbook win. I know she has a lot of fans out there, but I actually feel like Quvenzhané Wallis for Beasts of the Southern Wild would have been a very cool win for playing Hush Puppy. And I also think, Emma Stone's win for La La Land just didn't do it for me. That just kind of felt like a carryover with the movie. And I would have gone with Isabelle Huppert for Elle. So those were two definitely that I wanted to talk about from this era. But my number one most heartbreaking, when we think of the word heartbreaking, is when Judy Garland lost for A Star is Born. And I think this is really heartbreaking because, you know, I actually like Grace Kelly a lot as an actress. She won for The Country Girl. But Judy, to me, delivers this top-notch musical and dramatic performance. And she lost because of her persona and the public opinion of her at the time. And I feel like the Academy wanted someone like Grace Kelly, and Judy just could never be that. And that just breaks my heart.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you listed so many great losses there. You listed like a top 5, basically.
I did.
Which is good. I love the people who have very distinct opinions, and I pretty much agree with all of them. I mean, I do probably like Jennifer Lawrence in Silver Linings Playbook, possibly more than you, but that's definitely a race where I could make an argument for pretty much everyone else in that category as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Judy has certainly been listed many, many times as a heartbreaking loss, including on the very last episode that we just recorded. So there you have it. Yes. But let's talk about what we're here to talk about here, which is the 10th Academy Awards. We've got some real heavy hitters nominated this year. The nominees were Irene Dunne for The Awful Truth, Greta Garbo for Camille, Janet Gaynor for A Star is Born, Luise Rainer for The Good Earth, and Barbara Stanwyck for Stella Dallas, with the winner being Luise Rainer for The Good Earth. So, Sophia, before we actually talked about these performances individually, kind of like in DMs, but I wanted to know if you had broader observations before we get into it and sort of opinions about the collective lineup that we have here.
Yeah. So overall, I think that this year and this time is such a fascinating period in Hollywood history. And I think the ghost of Irving G. Thalberg really hangs over this time, right? He dies in 1936, huge figure at MGM and obviously a presence in this Oscar year. But to me, this group of nominees really showcases the highs and the lows of acting up to that time and what you can really do in the medium. And it also really highlights the intense studio politics and how those ultimately really influence who wins at the Oscars. And like you said, we have big heavy hitters here. These names are so recognizable. I think if you just went up to someone on the street and asked them to name an actress from this period, they would name one of these women who were nominated this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think despite the winner, we'll get to it. This is such a memorable lineup. It really, really is. We do have so many icons. Greta Garbo, Barbara Stanwyck. I mean, Irene Dunne, I don't know if she's as recognizable to the average person, but should be up there with them. Janet Gaynor returning after her first Best Actress win for the very first Academy Awards in the first version of A Star is Born. This generational property. And then even Luise Rainer, with her becoming the first actor to win back-to-back Oscars. It's such a distinct lineup, and I feel like unlike a lot of the years that we've talked about so far with Best Actress, this is one where people do have pretty firm opinions, which is exciting. And very different opinions. There are people who do defend Luise Rainer, but I think this is a really nice snapshot of the actresses who were also just popular at the time and the kinds of films that were big at the time. So I think it's very much an interesting race we can get into with some very, very different performances nominated, which I always appreciate.
I do too. It makes it interesting. And when you asked me to do this year in particular, I was so excited, but also just a little nervous because I know that people get very, very fired up about this year in particular, and they will be fired up after they listen to this episode. I am very sure of that.
Yes, they certainly will. We'll get to that later, but I think we should jump into these nominees individually. starting in alphabetical order with Irene Dunne for The Awful Truth.
I am so excited.
Yes. This is already Irene Dunne's third Oscar nomination. She was first nominated for Cimarron in 1931, which was kind of a snooze, but she was nominated in 1936, just the year before this nomination, for Theodora Goes Wild, which is a very fun movie. Same kind of screwball energy as this, and yeah, I'm really excited to talk about The Awful Truth. For longtime listeners of the show, we actually covered The Awful Truth as the Best Picture runner-up on the Best Picture series for this year. But the film, for those who don't know, it is about Lucy and Jerry, who are this couple played by Irene Dunne and Cary Grant. They decide that their marriage isn't really working, so they get a divorce, and they try to date other people, but they keep just finding themselves in each other's lives. And she's having this relationship with a guy from Oklahoma who she really doesn't match very well with, and he's going off with women who also aren't really a great match for him. But really, it's very apparent through all of their interactions that even if they're divorcing, they really might belong together after all. So again, we covered this extensively on Best Picture series. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I also just love this movie so much, so I probably will. But Sophia, I mean, you know, we've already talked about it even before the recording.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on The Awful Truth and Irene Dunne?
So just the movie specifically, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, not just from this period, not just in the screwball comedy genre. This is like one of my insomnia movies. Like if I can't sleep, I will put this on. It is just such a delight. It also has a pretty tight runtime, which I really appreciate, especially when we're thinking of movies from the 30s. And I think, obviously, I love anything with Cary Grant. I will never, pretend that I don't want to see Cary Grant in a movie, but Irene Dunne really is the shining star here. I think they play off of each other so well, but, when I was watching this, I just found myself, like, when I was taking notes, just looking at her costumes and her line delivery and the way that she would just respond emotionally with her eyes to any scenario that was in front of her. I think despite being an actress who didn't want to do comedy, she was one of those at the time who took melodramas more seriously and wanted to do those. She has a gift, and I think that is comedy. And I'm sure we'll get to her skills at improvising too, working with Leo McCarey. But yeah, I think this is such a signature comedy performance and one of my favorite Best Actress nominations ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very, very high praise right off the bat here.
Definitely.
Yeah. Listen, I completely agree. I'm just going to say it. I think this is a tour de force performance from both of them, her and Cary Grant, honestly.
Of course.
I love a screwball comedy that really allows both the male lead and the female lead to be funny and to be right, to be wrong with different situations. And that's why I really love this movie. And I think the two of them, they just operate on the same wavelength, and it's so apparent on the screen, and it just feels like they're both very much in the same movie, which is really the key to these kinds of comedies.
Yeah, absolutely. And they really are operating, on an even playing field. And I found that to be very modern and progressive for a comedy back then, that one never really felt ahead of the other. It wasn't like he was just playing tricks on her and she was like at the receiving end. I like how she had the upper hand sometimes too. And I think through her performance, I love how she always does kind of seem a little smarter, and like she knows she's a little smarter, but she would never tell him. I do love that about her performance too.
Yeah. But I mean, she really just enters this film like a burst of energy, like, wearing this glamorous white fur coat, just immediately announcing herself as this compelling presence, and both of them lying about where they've been, both of them trying to get away with it. And I mean, it's really no surprise to me that Leo McCarey really encouraged improv and that the script was constantly changing, even though I think, honestly, the film feels pretty airtight and just so packed with all these great moments that I can't even imagine, like, cutting them. It's still so loose, and I think that is reflective in their performances. All the little subtle offhand lines and sort of gestures that she does. There's such a showcase for her gifts as a comedic performer. I just want to shout out our friend Brandon Stanwyck, who said in his Letterboxd review of this film that he could imagine that Irene Dunne would have been like a really great SNL host if SNL was around at the time, because she's just so versatile in so many different styles of comedy, even, let alone acting, that she could really do anything.
I love that. I can absolutely see her on SNL. And also I can see her doing some sort of singing monologue even, or incorporating song, right? She had that stipulation that she was going to sing in her movies. And like even in that scene in the movie when she's like having this recital, she's still, I love that she's not embarrassed and she's like going along with it. And the way she's acting there, I could absolutely see that translating well to SNL.
There's even like the great line even in the opening sequence where I wrote this down actually because it's so good, the specifics of how she says something, where they're talking about Armand, the music teacher that she's kind of, you know, Cary Grant thinks that she might be having an affair with him, even though maybe not. But he says, "I am a great teacher, not a great lover." and then she says, just very quickly, she's like, "That's right, Armand. No one can ever accuse you of being a great lover." Just the way she emphasizes like certain words like that, they turn these lines on the page into, you know, if you're just reading that on the page, you'd be like, that's funny. But just the way she interprets them, I think it really turns them into these laugh out loud kinds of moments.
I completely agree. Yeah, no, I wrote down some of her lines too, because just the delivery of them, sometimes she can almost have this like deadpan sense of humor, and other times it is like much more like light and fun to it. So one that I really loved was, again, with the Dixie Belle Lee scene later, one of Jerry's dates, when she says, I guess it was easier for her to change her name than for her whole family to change theirs.
Yeah, that is such shady shade.
Right? Just a zinger.
I love it. Like even they're like when she's with the judge, when they're sort of getting the divorce going and talking about like who gets custody of their dog, you know, and she's like talking to the judge at the bench and she's like, "Do you like cats?" I don't either, you know. Just very like quick.
You get her whole personality in that scene. Just you can see how easily she creates connections with people and that bright personality that she has, and just how present her sense of humor is throughout the movie. I have a question for you that I was going to ask you. So I told you in the DMs I was going to ask you a would you rather.
Yes.
So if you were Mr. Smith, the dog, in the courtroom scene, who are you going with? Are you picking Lucy or are you picking Jerry?
Oh, goodness. Wow. That's really intense. Because look, they're both calling my name. They're both having some tempting offers for me.
Exactly.
I think, you know, just with the way that Cary Grant really just has so much fun with me, Mr. Smith, the dog, I would probably go with Cary Grant in that situation. But listen, we can obviously visit Irene Dunne anytime we want.
Right. It is.
That's how I feel.
Not
what about
in.
you? I'm going to turn the tables back on you. What would you say?
So, you know, as good of friends as I think Lucy and I could be, and I'd want to steal her hats and her coats and everything that she wears. I really couldn't turn down the opportunity to be Cary Grant's best friend, you know, live-in best friend.
Yeah. Listen, Cary Grant, I can be whatever you want me to be.
Exactly.
I'll just throw that out there. So I also just love the line where she's making toast and she's with her Aunt Patsy. And I literally just copied and pasted this whole long monologue that she says because it's so great, and her line delivery, like maybe I can't do it as well as her, but she just says, well, I'm serious about Dan Leeson. I like him. I like him very much. I'm all through with Jerry. He doesn't mean a thing to me. I don't love him, and what's more, I probably never did. I'm sure I never loved him. Now I hate him, and that surprises you, doesn't it? I hate Jerry Warner, and I love Dan Leeson very, very much, and I hope he's just crazy about me because I think he's the finest man I ever met, and I know my toast is burning.
Perfect.
I mean, yeah.
That line reading in particular, this monologue, when I heard it and I learned that, that could have been something she improvised, like that sounds to me like something you would hear in a Nora Ephron movie decades later. How did she do that? How did they come up with this? And I just feel like she is just like floating on her own planet sometimes throughout this movie. The way that she just is just above the rest. It's kind of crazy that she was able to accomplish this, I think.
Yeah. My last guest when we talked about Irene Dunne and Theodora Goes Wild and Carole Lombard and My Man Godfrey, these two great screwball comedy performances. My last guest, Izzy from Be Kind Rewind.
I'm excited to hear it.
Yes. She really talked about just the musicality that is required for these kinds of performances. And I really think that Irene Dunne really has it in both Theodora Goes Wild and especially this.
I fully agree. I do love her in Theodora Goes Wild too, but I think here she's really honed in like what she has learned there, and I think she's like leaning further into the good material, and working with someone like Cary Grant I think is definitely helpful for her. But yeah, I think, talking about the musicality and her being this performer, growing up wanting to be an opera singer, I like how she is able to lean on those talents for her just even line readings, even scenes when she's not using music.
Yeah. And going back to what we were saying earlier, it's wild that really she didn't even want to necessarily do comedy like this. Like she really wanted to just be a dramatic performer, when in reality, like, look at what she was capable of here. I'm so glad that sort of, I don't know if they made her do this, but like the fact that it happened is just really exciting. Also, the physicality. I mean, just the comedy of the dance scene where they're at the big hall and, really all of the scenes of her just being mortified by Dan Leeson are just so funny. And she just barely hides her contempt and just her disinterest in this man who comes from Oklahoma and wants to take her back there. I mean, like the scene where she's singing and she's at the piano and Dan is there also singing Home on the Range, and she's like trying to harmonize with him. Definitely one of the bigger laugh out loud moments for me.
I agree. It's scenes with him and her are especially brutal, I think, because she just, like, even when, he's talking about Oklahoma City, her face, just her eyes when he says no more New York shops, and you can see her mouth kind of twitch and her eyes just like, what am I going to do? I can't do that. And she knows deep down that that's not what's going to happen. And you can see all of that just with one look. And of course, I think we have to talk about the scene when he has the poem to read to her and Jerry is behind the door tickling her. That is just, I mean, that's a great scene of screwball comedy and how well they play off of each other. But Irene Dunne there with her, like her wild giggles and then trying to stifle it and listen to this poem that I would laugh at without being tickled, to be honest. She does a very good job there.
Right. And what I love about the film is that it sort of is like flipped when we get to the scene where Cary Grant is now off and sort of getting engaged to this very rich society woman, and he's on the phone and she's kind of like ribbing him in the same room while he's having the conversation. I just love that. I mean, I would love to just dedicate this whole next segment to her transformation into Lola at the end, so pretending to be Jerry's sister just in front of this hoity-toity society family. She basically embarrasses him in front of his new girlfriend, and she's totally hamming it up being the most obnoxious person that you can come across at a party. Like pretending to get wasted, just being like all over people and sloppy. I love the part where they're talking about drinking and she mentions how much Jerry loves to drink, and she's just like, we call him Jerry the Nipper.
I love that too. This scene is so good. It's just also I think here this shows like she's not afraid as an actress to like lean into those like potentially embarrassing comedic moments. I feel like that as a dramatic actress, as someone who's more interested in these melodramas of the time, that could be really hard, but she just goes fully into it and commits. It's a pretty fearless performance in that scene, I think. I love also when she's sitting between Jerry and Barbara on the couch and she's leaning on him. It is so good. I just love that, because if I were Barbara, I'd be like, this woman is definitely not his sister. This is weird, but she's playing with that there, which I really love.
Right.
And of course, you know, turning that song that we heard before, bringing that back again, just an extra little punch there.
That is like, if there's like an Oscar scene, quote unquote, in this film for her, I feel like that's what you gotta show. And then just all of her like chaotic energy on the road after they've left in embarrassment, and she's just fully like truly embraced chaos and is like doing whatever she can to delay this finalizing of their divorce, because it is the last day. I just love how it goes into pure absurdity, like almost Looney Tunes style of nonsense, of her just like deliberately crashing the car and all of that. And, like, getting on the police bike and, like, honking the horn.
Yeah, the police bike, like, that whole part did remind me, actually, of, like, Looney Tunes or these, like, old-school cartoons. That's kind of the humor that she's playing with. And I think, too, like, thinking about this, like, finale of sorts being on the last day, I think the plot structure of this movie is pretty brilliant. You know what you're getting right away and how much time you have with them and, you know, what could happen by the end of that. So then once you get to that last day, you're like, okay, you know, what I've been hoping for this whole time, for them to get back together, will it happen? I think it's just a really great setup for a comedy. And I mean, both of these actors just carry it all the way home.
That's the thing. Like, we're obviously talking about a lot of funny moments, but I do think there is a really strong core to the story itself. And by the time we get to that final day, it really is like this apex of her doing everything she can to get them to be together again. And even in the final scenes here, where this is probably the most dramatic, obviously, portion of the film by the end, where they really are letting their guard down. And she's very vulnerable with him and very, like, almost sensual when she's in the bed and wanting him to sort of reciprocate the energy that she's giving off. I think it really just crystallizes everything for me in this performance and this character and their relationship, that sort of all this chaotic mess was so that they could finally see that they truly do belong together in the end, even though they might drive each other crazy, but like they are each other's crazy.
Yeah. I love that too. And that scene right at the ending when they're in this, like these adjoined rooms, it reminded me a lot of in It Happened One Night, the very famous Walls of Jericho, right? Our earlier screwball comedy. I love that. I feel like Irene Dunne and Cary Grant have really just unstoppable, palpable chemistry. And this was one finale where I was like, why is the code a thing here? I really just want them to get together. I need that to just happen at the end. I just want them, you know, but it's 1937. So what can I really expect?
Yeah. The best you can get is a metaphorical, weird puppet situation thing on the wall. That's like, he's going into her doorway, and it's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah, like, I'll just have to accept this clock again.
Yes, exactly. Well, one thing that we're doing with this show is also reading reviews of the time period of talking about these performances. So Variety said that Irene Dunne in the comedy lead was first brought out as a celluloid comedienne by Columbia in Theodora Goes Wild. She tops that performance by almost an Alp in Awful Truth. Which is a great metaphor.
I loved that one.
Yeah. So she this is a prime example of the reviews she got at the time. She was the like best performance of her career kinds of reviews. So even though this is a pretty, I guess you could say, almost broad comedy to kind of performance, it's still something that was almost like undeniable when it came to Oscars.
I love that. And I saw
Yeah.
too, like early on, so before the movie came out, in the New York Times when they did like the press releases for the movies coming, it said that this was going to be utilized as a comedy vehicle for Irene Dunne. There was no mention of Cary Grant, actually. It was just like she was the star of this, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. And that does end up bearing out in the Oscar nominations, sadly, for Cary Grant, because what an awful snub. I know this is the Best Actress series, but like,
yeah,
you can't have one without the other.
I really hate it. I don't get it. I really don't
They
get
were
it.
jealous of him because he was too hot and good at his job.
I agree. That's it. That's the answer.
Yep. There is the slap the stud syndrome situation that persists to this day. But again, not a Best Actor podcast. All right. Anything else on Irene Dunne? We have 4 other performances to get to. We could talk about Irene Dunne all day, but
we really could. The only thing I'll add is just for listeners, like if you do love this movie, there is a great essay by Molly Haskell about it that's actually like a companion piece with the Criterion release. So definitely read that. She has some beautiful things to say about Irene Dunne and her performance.
yes, agreed. And here we go. Let's get to our next nominee, Greta Garbo in Camille. A very, very different style of performance. But
You could say that.
yeah, we've arrived here at Greta Garbo's second year of being nominated at the Oscars. Technically her third performance, since she was nominated for 2 films in 1930. This is after quite a few years of snubs by the Academy. She was working, since Anna Christie. She did do Anna Karenina later. It's interesting that they finally were like, oh yeah, Greta Garbo, we should bring her back. But she did a lot of these kinds of like noble, royal types of characters in this era. In some respect, I guess you could say this is sort of in that vein, maybe. Like she's in these upper class situations. So she's playing Marguerite, who is a courtesan. She really likes to live the high life, and she meets a guy played by Robert Taylor, who she really has a connection with. But she's also being courted by this rich guy, this baron, who she doesn't really have a connection with. But he's rich, so there you go. Pretty classic love triangle situation. She's also suffering from consumption. So there's also an element here where she's having to confront her own mortality. So that's pretty much what the film is. Tragic romance. It's based on the novel La Dame aux Camélias by Alexandre Dumas. For those who think that this plot sounds familiar, because I certainly thought of some of that while I was watching this, Baz Luhrmann drew a whole lot of inspiration from this story, this novel, when he made Moulin Rouge. So this is not quite as spectacular, but a pretty similar plot. But first off, thoughts on Greta Garbo as an actress before we get into this performance?
Yeah, so Greta Garbo is to say she's a mystery, right? I think everyone would say that about Greta Garbo. But to me, while I appreciate her talent and can, look to her as one of the, if not the greatest actress of the period, I've never had that deep of a connection to her like I have with some of the other actresses. And I think part of that is just built into her persona, to the roles she took, to the way that MGM marketed her, basically. So I don't think that's necessarily like any fault of hers or fault of mine, but just that's kind of the way that I feel about her. And so I had never seen Camille before. This was a first time watch for me. And I am always really impressed by the way that Garbo, how she knows where the camera is, how to use the camera. It's almost like she is a model in that way. And I know she was, and like the way that she knows her angles. She is this very ethereal, beautiful actress the way that she conveys emotion is actually pretty ridiculous how good it is. So I loved that. We can definitely talk about the movie, though. I did have some challenges with it, but that's kind of how I feel, I would say, about Greta Garbo.
Yes. I very much enjoy Greta Garbo as an actress. The thing is, she can be used well, or she can be used not so well. Sometimes I do think that directors tend to rely on her natural charm or just her face, you know, because it's very striking naturally, just her star power that she has on screen, and just use that and sort of think that that's enough to carry a story or to make a character interesting,
Right.
but not really always backing it up with a strong enough story. Here, I do think in the hands of a director like George Cukor here, you know, maybe the relationship sort of triangle situation isn't as effective as other types of films about this kind of a dynamic, but I do think he really knows how to utilize her. And I think by the end of the film, I think we're really seeing her be more comfortable on screen than probably ever before. I think for those who have seen a lot of her performances, what she does in the first part of the film can feel pretty familiar, I would say. You know, going back to the whole thing of relying on the close-ups and the mystery and that whole sensibility. But I do think there's something different here, something deeper. She does feel more relaxed, to me at least, less distant, less aloof, like she is in a number of her films. I do think that she's asked to be like a charming woman. A courtesan has to be charming, and you know, a woman like that isn't going to be like naturally aloof or disinterested. But
Yeah.
like, you know, when she's at the opera, she's very relaxed, I think, and very comfortable in her own skin, which is something that we typically don't see from her. So yeah, I don't know. Do you feel like there's something a little light about her?
Yeah, I thought, like, as it progressed, I said the same thing, where I felt like this was actually a project where like this really suited her well, and I could feel her kind of growing into the role. I also feel that, you know, when you think of Garbo as a person and her relationship to attention and like to letting people in, I think that's really interesting when you think about this role, and when you think about, we have another Armand here.
Yeah, that's right. Robert Taylor.
And her relationship with him, and then with the Baron. But I also really I thought she felt really light at the beginning, even too. Just like at the opera, I thought to myself, like, oh, she seems like a lot of fun. She had this good sense of humor about her. She just seems, and I think this is, again, just part of being Garbo and part of her persona, but she will always, like, it's always evident to me that she is just this alpha woman. She will always just stand above the rest. And I feel like that's like pretty perfect for a role like this, where the role is that people are noticing you, and that's a big part of your character. So I feel, and working with Cukor, from, you know, what I've read from other actresses of the time, I can see how that would allow her to loosen up and really lean into those parts of the role that she maybe wasn't as familiar with earlier in her career. So I think that that's probably part of that too.
Yeah, and I think what works for me in this role compared to others is that she works well against Robert Taylor, I think. I think she's able to let go of her iciness and really have a natural conversation with him, where she's just so enchanting and so welcoming that sort of just, it makes you want them to be together, which should be the goal of the story, is to believe that this romance, you know, however doomed it may be, is real and is worth investing in. I mean, this is like, if we want to draw the comparison, it's like Ewan McGregor and Nicole Kidman. This is what we're supposed to be investing in. And I think maybe it's not quite that, but few things can be. Right. But I think, you know, it's a close enough approximation that I felt kind of invested in. And I wasn't like, I'm not like still like haunted by it necessarily like I am with other types of situations like this, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like it felt real to me.
Completely. And so I will start by saying, like, I love Ewan McGregor so much, but Robert Taylor does not do it for me. Like, he's just one of those Hollywood men where I just am so, I don't know what it is about him, but I just can't understand like why anyone would be interested in him at the time.
Fair.
Maybe
Fair.
it's his relationship with Barbara Stanwyck that we could get into later. I don't know. But it is weird to me. But one thing that I did hear on Karina Longworth's podcast, You Must Remember This, she has an MGM series, and she said that while they were filming Camille, Robert Taylor was really confused because between takes, Garbo would be not, I want to be alone Garbo in her trailer. She would actually be walking around holding hands with him, and he was so confused. And it was because she was method acting in that, and she wanted him to believe that she loved him. And she said that he was beautiful and stupid. That was what she said about him.
Well, fair.
It's like, okay. I feel that.
Yeah. That's very funny. I mean, I don't know. I do like their scenes where they sort of go off and they're going to Armand's house in the country where she's really like thriving in that more small scale sort of environment. And what's interesting is that we don't really get too much backstory on who Marguerite is and how she became a courtesan and where she came from. But, when I'm watching these scenes in the country, it almost feels like she was returning to the simple days of the past. Like, she wasn't always in this position of being in these upper class environments. And I just feel like she's happy now. Everything is sort of stripped back and she can just stroll along by the creek and sort of live a simpler life for a little bit. I could see that, or I could even see it as her just thriving in this environment where she gets to be more free because she's not really used to that. Like, she has this baron who she clearly doesn't love, and maybe she just feels cloistered by all this sort of high society stuff. But I think either way, that's where you really find yourself even more invested in their relationship, at least for me. And then, like, the scene where Lionel Barrymore is there playing Armand's father, disapproving father, and he's just, like, forbidding his son from being involved with her because of her past, I think, just her reputation, how it'll ruin the family name. I think that's all very heartbreaking emotions that she's really tapping into and really registering the frustration she has. I think she just has this way about her where she's able to tap into, like, how the world is kind of unfair in a lot of the situations she finds herself in, and she just wishes for it to be better, but she's just like, it's just like so exhausting for her being a person in the world, which is relatable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think like their relationship on screen works. Like, this is one of Robert Taylor, I would say, his better performances to me. And that could be because he's acting against Garbo. But I also what you were saying, I think there was one scene in particular where her acting to me was just fascinating when she is supposed to be waiting outside and she goes upstairs to see Armand, and you can see in that moment there's this little flicker when she first sees him in her eyes, and you're like, oh no, this, like, you're in deep, you love this guy, and then instantly the facade comes back once they start talking. And the fact that she can do that just so quickly is pretty brilliant. And I think like part of the reason why she was such a star at the time is because you can feel everything that she's feeling just through a look.
Yeah. I mean, she was the biggest star in the world, period. No question. And, I think maybe when people look back, they're like, why did she, like, capture so many people's attention? Like, I know she's obviously striking and she is a good actress, but, like, so many of her performances in these films are so gloomy and sad and depressing. And you kind of, like, wonder, like, what really drew people to the cinemas for these kinds of, like, doomed romance kinds of stories. But it's just her. She has the X factor.
Yeah. And like, her ghost might come after me, like, please don't, but saying this, but it's kind of like how audiences today love like a Nicholas Sparks, like, super charged sad story. Like, audiences still go for those. So I imagine back then that was part of why they were popular. People just love a good cry. And if you do have a star like that delivering and making these for you, that just explains, I think, why they're so successful.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I don't know if any of those films necessarily have like the Greta Garbo type.
They do not.
But I definitely see what you're saying.
It's what they're missing. And more.
Like maybe we'll be generous and say Rachel McAdams for The Notebook is like, yeah.
There you go.
But anyway, I will say there is a scene in this film that I think is so representative of so many Greta Garbo scenes in films. It's almost like a parody. It's a little bit earlier in the film where Armand has given her a book to read, and she's like, I don't read, which is like, yeah, okay. But I love just the casual way she tosses that off. Like, I don't read. But they talk about what the book is about and how like it has a sad ending, and she says she doesn't like sad endings, and like she probably won't read it, but she'll keep it anyway. And you know, I think obviously a discerning viewer would be able to pick up on the fact that like this is clear foreshadowing what's happening here, that this is not a film that's going to have a happy ending. But you know, it's like that sense of doom that is so present in so many of her films, that bittersweet quality. And I guess it really is this kind of encapsulation of the allure that Greta Garbo had at this time, where she was the most buzzed about star in the world, even though she made all these gloomy films with sad endings. But people knew what they were getting into with a Greta Garbo film. They knew what the effect would be. They knew what the end would be, and they still went anyway because they were compelled by it.
Yeah.
And they'll sort of stick it out because of her.
Definitely. And this was Garbo's most successful movie at the box office so far. So this was a really, really popular film. And yeah, even though you can pick up on that, I love that scene too. It just shows that like sense of humor that she has a little bit. But then, you can pick up on what's coming. But yeah.
Very much so. It all just leads up to that final scene, which I think is really extraordinary. Probably my single favorite scene of hers that I've seen from her from any film that I've seen of her. So, you know, for a lot of the film, she's coughing. She's been sick with consumption, and considering the nature of this being what it is, we know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So she's on her deathbed at the end of the film, and she's barely even speaking above like a whisper, and she's so affecting in that scene, and it really almost took me aback, just the rawness of that. She's so fragile and so convincing as this woman who is really on her last legs, and like the moment where she realizes that Armand has come to see her, and her wanting to look more presentable and put on rouge. It's all really heartbreaking. And the moment where she's like in his arms and they're talking about going to the country again, and just the hope in her eyes and how she's like running out of breath. It's like really affecting and really difficult to watch in a way that you don't always get from classic film.
Yeah, it's an incredibly moving scene. And I think, you know, when we see her at the beginning, like we have this like little card at the beginning that says she brightened her wit with champagne and sometimes her eyes with tears. So we get this like very, I think, like this picture of this woman who just kind of floats through the world. And, you know, I called her an alpha earlier. Like you can just tell she feels very in control all the time. And then getting to this moment and seeing that Garbo can do this here is just, and I can't help but compare it to a performance we'll talk about later, but this is how you effectively and emotionally die on screen. And
yeah,
you know, to see her go from the beginning of this film and then to the end, where we know she's always headed there, and we know that, but I think the fact that this was even able to surprise me that's a really impressive thing that she was able to do.
Yeah. And I don't know if you read like behind the scenes of the filming of this final scene, but apparently originally they were just kind of sort of have it be like they have a final conversation. But Greta Garbo was even insistent on like, this is she's going to die within minutes. And like, this is not like a normal conversation that they're going to have. It's going to feel so raw and immediate and uncomfortable, and have her, you know, lowering her register so much to a whisper that she was very instinctive about what a woman like that would be going through in a moment like that, which I think speaks to her natural instincts as an actor.
Yeah. And one thing I've always loved about her is that she's such an inspiration for people at this time, and just thinking about this period in history of her advocating for herself and the way that she navigated this time, in addition to, in this movie too, outside of, you know, industry politics, just being able to say, like, this is the right decision, this is how I would do it, and then it was right.
Yep, her mind. One review of the time from Los Angeles Herald Express really sums it up, how people felt about this performance. They said, if Greta Garbo is not Hollywood's greatest actress in her greatest dramatic role, then I have been bewitched.
Wow.
After seeing this performance. So, yeah, truly cementing her legacy with this performance that, once again, the Academy had no choice but to be like, okay, we're going to give her another nomination. Calm down.
Yeah.
Because truly, she had been getting so many snubs between 1930 and here. Even though that's only 6 years, she still made so many films and so many memorable performances that it's like, yeah, bring her back.
It's terrible.
So.
I mean, I just think about what an icon she is, and that how many times I continue to be surprised when I learn and relearn how few Oscar nominations she actually had, let alone the fact that she didn't win one ever.
Yeah, we'll get to that later, how that happened. But
we will.
Let's move on to our next nominee, Janet Gaynor for A Star Is Born. Hooray for Janet Gaynor coming back after winning the very first Best Actress Oscar. We get to see her in a talkie this time. Not only a talkie, but a color film. This is only the second color film that we've talked about on this Best Actress series, the first being Becky Sharp a few episodes ago. This is, of course, the first Star is Born film, unless you want to count What Price Hollywood, which comes out a few years before this. But this is the first of a few times that you'll hear A Star is Born mentioned on this show, as you'll see in later decades. This is a character that has been nominated 3 times in this category. Obviously, Judy Garland, as previously mentioned, 1954, and then Lady Gaga in 2018. But Janet Gaynor, she's playing Esther Blodgett, who is from the country, but she just dreams of being a Hollywood actress. So she goes there without a penny to her name, basically, and meets this guy, Norman Maine, who is a washed-up alcoholic actor played by Frederick March. They fall in love, and he helps her break into the business, and she really just has a meteoric rise, and she has to change her name, of course, to Vicky Lester along the way, and she has to devote a lot of time and attention to Norman when he's just further descending into alcoholism, even if it basically means sacrificing her own career to help him out. A tale as old as time, as we know. Had you seen this version before?
I had, actually. So before the 2018 version came out, I watched or rewatched all 3 versions, and it was my first time watching it then, but it's a great rewatch. I actually do love this version a lot. I think it's very underrated.
Yeah, I agree. I really like this one. I actually really like how this really satirizes the industry in an interesting way. Again, like Hollywood commenting on itself, which we don't often get, especially in this era. The whole like renaming bit and like her having to be packaged as this hot young star, even if she doesn't exactly really fit that archetype. Right. It's like that's just what they know to do. That's how they market these young, new women in Hollywood. It just feels like everything is sort of motivated by business rather than feelings. Like feelings don't matter at all. I think it's like a pretty powerful cautionary tale kind of story on top of everything else, which is the romance. We got another doomed romance to talk about here, I guess. But this business could be so brutal, and it's like she just so happens to be at the right place at the right time to have met Norman Maine at the exact right point where he would still have some influence in the industry to help her out. And I do think of all of the versions of A Star Is Born, they probably all have a kind of meta commentary to it, obviously, about the industry and the first encounter and everything. But I think this really, for me, feels like strangely the most potent and the most satirical about the business, which is why I enjoy watching this one.
I agree. I think that this one does the best job of kind of endorsing that Hollywood LA movie experience, but also condemning it and, yet, like you said, having it be a cautionary tale. And I think Janet Gaynor is actually the perfect actress for that, because I think, it exists as commentary, right, that she won the first Best Actress Oscar, and audiences at the time probably knew that. But that being there, that she still has those wide eyes when she comes to Hollywood, that she still feels like this Midwestern girl, you almost forget who she was. She's that good in this, and you're able to, I think, go along with her and have that awe when she gets there and kind of be sucked into the business in the same way that she is. And I think in the other versions, while I do love most of them, I think that the stars that are at the center, they have such a deep pop cultural weight to them that you can't really separate it in the same way that you can with Janet Gaynor. And, perhaps that's my distance from 1937 compared to the other years. But I do think her performance is that strong that she can pull you out of it for a second and take you right into her experience as Esther Blodgett becoming Vicky Lester.
Right. And I think we mentioned on that very first episode about Janet, how she just really does have such the perfect eyes, especially for silent film, when you need to just express everything through your face, because you can't obviously express it through dialogue. Right. Even in this situation where she does have many speaking lines, she still is, for me, most effective just when it's lingering on her face.
I agree. And I think, too, part of the reason why this version is so interesting to me is because the other versions, I would say, especially thinking about 2018, they really lean into the romance, hard. You believe that these people are in love. And here, it felt, I wouldn't say fully transactional, but there was part of it that felt more like it was about the careers and, her having this growing career as opposed to their love that was then lost. And that feels like a more pointed commentary on Hollywood, whereas the others, it feels so much more about that romance and about the individual star.
Very true. Yeah. I'll say for Janet, I think she is good here, not as good in this rewatch as I remember her being, but obviously very smart casting, as you already talked about, where she absolutely feels like this sweet, humble country girl who's always dreamed of being in Hollywood and is idolizing all the big stars of the day, and then pretty quickly realizing that this is going to be hard work. This is not just going to be a walk in the park here. I feel like she is kind of the perfect vessel that you can sort of see everything from her perspective with the wide-eyed thing. But I do think that the film doesn't always give us enough information about her, and why she first became fascinated with the movies. And even when she's performing as an actress, we don't really get to see any of it at all, which feels like a missed opportunity for me and for her performance to really connect.
Right.
Where I really feel like we could get a fully fleshed out character and show how much the movies mean to her, and sort of knowing that information as an audience member might make those later moments of her wanting to actually quit the business, all the more effective.
Yeah, I think that when you don't see those scenes, I think you're right. It feels almost like her motivations are more shallow, or you don't see her talent.
Shallow. Very
It's
good.
just there, right? Did it. I knew I could get that in somehow.
Sorry.
But you don't see her, like, actually showcasing her talent as an actress beyond a couple of, you know, scenes. And I think that when you don't see those scenes, I think you're right. It feels almost like her motivations are more shallow, or you don't see her talent. Like, you don't see her talent. You don't see her motivations are more shallow, or you don't see her talent. 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 You don't see impressions that she's doing of other actresses at the time, which I enjoyed. But
I did like that scene.
Yeah. But I think it's what's hard is that, the later versions, the smartest thing that they did was turn them into musical types of films, because that's an easier thing that audiences can connect with. But even still, like, having just a couple of scenes maybe of her, like whether it's like screen tests or like scenes that she's performing, I feel like that would have really helped me to connect with her as a character.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I'm trying to like separate as much as I can from this performance that she's giving versus the writing itself of not giving us those bigger scenes where I feel like she could really flesh out her character more as an actress. And I'm trying to like figure out, is this more because Janet Gaynor wasn't able to get there for me, or is it just the movie didn't really live up to what it could have been, sort of thing? I mean, I still really like this movie a lot for the reasons that we talked about. It's just, I feel like it could have been all the more affecting if we really leaned in on her motivations, I guess.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it does fall into some of the traps that the later ones do too. I keep comparing it to the other Star is Borns, but I feel like it's just inevitable.
Yeah.
But whenever it leans a little too far onto the man, like the male character, I'm always like, I want to get back to our titular star being born and what's going on with her. So I feel like I would say it's mostly the writing, because I think she does a good job as this like Midwestern Cinderella type. But I think we need better writing here to just give her more to do, because I think she could do it.
Yeah. Actually, another thing to connect it to the 2018 version that I just wanted to mention, this is kind of a non sequitur, but I made a note of it, where someone at the casting office says that Esther's chances of making it in the business are 1 in 100,000.
Oh my God.
And then Esther says, maybe I'm the one, which very much reminded me of Gaga's press tour, talking about there can be 100 people in the room and 99 don't believe in you, but one does. So I'm just saying, like, I feel like maybe she was intentional in her references. Just saying.
I think you're right. We don't give Gaga enough credit for how creative she is with press tours. I can't wait to see what she's doing with House of Gucci.
That's going to be a whole other can of worms there.
I thought the reference to the 2018 version that I laughed at a lot was when he said, mind if I take just one more look? I laughed at that.
Yes.
of course.
Yes. Which is in all of them, I believe.
Right.
But I just love the different ways that that line is expressed. And I love the randomness of that being carried over into all 4 of them. But Janet Gaynor does not do a thing where she like puts her finger on her nose. But
I wish.
Still. Yeah. Actually, I do want to go back to the scene you mentioned of her being a waitress before she becomes an actress and her doing the impressions. I mean, I'd say there's a pretty clear impression that she's doing with Greta Garbo, which is really funny to have her in the same category, where she's just like, would you like some hors d'oeuvres?
Definitely.
Just in that like very, very Greta way. And then obviously another one that's imitating Katharine Hepburn. And then I think the other one is supposed to be Mae West.
Yeah.
None of this is actually like said out loud, like in the sense of like, oh, here's who I'm referencing. It's not like a character's like, oh, good Catherine impression. It's like, I imagine anyone in 1937 would just have this instant recognition of what she's doing, which I think is a really fun meta element and really allows her. I guess this is really the one moment where I get to see her having fun and expressing herself as an actress.
Yeah, absolutely. That was like the only moment that they really let her have. And for, audiences back then could definitely tell who they were. But I think audiences today, if there are any Drag Race watchers, on All Stars 2, Alaska does Mae West in Snatch Game. And that's how I recognized that one. So.
Wow.
Yeah, just another modern reference there.
Yes. I think towards the end of the film for me is when she does really earn her nomination, where she's going through some really trying times. She's accepting the award for Best Actress, of course, which is actually her real Oscar that she has on the podium. Like Janet Gaynor herself brought it, which is a fun little thing. But, obviously he makes the big scene, as we see all the time, and is, interrupting her, and just her shame and her humiliation in that moment, I think, is very well played. And, really all the way to the end where she decides that she wants to give up her career to take care of Norman. She's just so drained, and she's like so tired of this like cycle of him getting better and then slipping and relapsing. And you feel that in her body language, I think, in her face. And, obviously the moment they have their last conversation is so loaded and so dramatic. I mean, I guess I feel this about all the different versions. The final moment of them, and him bringing back, like, taking another look at you, that whole thing. And no matter what the situation is, I always feel it emotionally, and I do think she really carries through that ending really well. And obviously after he's gone, and her having to carry on and wondering, and having, what is it, her grandma come?
Yeah,
I think
grandma comes back.
One of the relatives, played by May Robson, past Best Actress nominee. Very good here. But all the way through to her big close-up moment at the end, announcing herself as Mrs. Norman Maine, I think it's great work from her. It really is. I mean, I don't think the whole entirety of the film is as consistent overall for me enough to say, like, she should have won this category necessarily, but happy to have her here.
I feel the same way. I think, not like the writing challenges are hard for me, because not believing as much in their romance makes the end more challenging, but she does deliver. Sure. I did feel the emotions that she was giving us in those scenes, and I thought that she did an excellent job there. But yeah, I think the not having that strong writing there for her, that really could have benefited her.
Yeah, pretty much. This review from the New York Herald Tribune, I just laughed at because of the way it was phrased, but this is what they were talking about Janet Gaynor at the time. They said, Janet Gaynor gave a beautifully rounded and appealing performance as the girl.
Just appealing, beautiful.
They couldn't remember her name, but she was the girl.
Oh, dear.
What an appealing girl Janet Gaynor made. So, look,
Take what you can get there.
Yeah. But I guess I sort of appreciate that the Academy wasn't too put off by the fact that it was a film commenting on itself. Obviously, we've talked, anyone who's in like Oscar prognosticating likes to talk about how the Oscars tend to like movies about themselves, which is very much true and has been true for many decades at this point. But this is a kind of film that feels especially scathing about the industry at times, not quite on like the Sunset Boulevard level, which we would eventually get, but one of these things where it's like, do we really want to be like that incisive about the industry? This is like, the height of the studio system, keeping a tight control of image and all of that, but they embraced it.
Yeah. And I'm glad that they did. I think that that's one of the things about it that really works, is how they just lean into that and share, like, this is how you can do it. Yeah. But if you do, here's our big warning.
Watch out. Watch out. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to our final losing nominee, Barbara Stanwyck for Stella Dallas. So we've come to a true icon here finally with Barbara Stanwyck, the only new nominee of this group, so that's something. Everyone else had a nomination before, but she was a former Ziegfeld girl. She eventually transitioned to film. She was in a number of films actually before this, Ladies of Leisure, So Big, Babyface, but then Stella Dallas is really what she got her biggest critical acclaim for up to that point. She is playing Stella Dallas, of course, who is a woman who is sort of seeking a higher status in life, hoping to marry rich. She finds a guy and they get married, and they have a daughter, Laurel, played by Anne Shirley, who gets a supporting actress nomination. She really loves her daughter very much and wants to give her the best life possible, but she also has turmoil with her husband. They separate, and he wants to marry this other woman, and Stella really finds that Laurel is almost embarrassed by her, and so she decides to basically sacrifice, a relationship with her so that Laurel can grow up and be happy with her ex-husband. Classic tearjerker. Thoughts on Barbara Stanwyck as an actress?
I love Barbara Stanwyck so much. She is probably in my top 3 to 5 actresses from this period. I love her so much. Really love her in Double Indemnity. I think that's where I saw her first. Lady Eve, of course. She is just such a versatile actress who can, I feel like in this movie in particular, she really advances acting beyond what we had seen ever before in dramatic acting. I feel like she is just so talented, and I'm obviously just so devastated that she never won an Oscar either.
Yeah, that's a running theme with these nominees. Yeah, I agree. I like pretty much everything I've seen of her. And there really are so few actresses like her, at least of her stature, that are just able to imbue all of her characters with so much complexity of emotion. And there's something that's just so instantly attention grabbing about the way she speaks, like the slightly lower pitch that she has sometimes in her voice, the way she carries herself with this confidence, but then also really has that ability to be so vulnerable, and that's really what this film allows for her, is to show all of those different things at once. She gets to be sultry and, a little bit playful, but then also kind of sad and pitiful too, and also maternal, and all these different things. I mean, I will just add here, first of all, that this is another example of, doing this Best Actress series, we have yet another mother who is sacrificing herself for the benefit of her child. It's really such a trope at this point, with Ruth Chatterton in both of her nominations, Marie Dressler with both of her nominations, Helen Hayes. I mean, there's still plenty more to come, I think, but I do think this is one of the better examples of that specific trope and that genre. And so much of that is because of her and what she brings to the material.
Right. We get so many, I feel like, throughout Oscar history, and especially where you are right now, so many maternal melodramas. They are just everywhere. Yep. But I feel like in this one in particular, if you had another actress who didn't, like you said, imbue her characters with so much complexity, if you had someone else doing this part, I don't know how well this movie would land, or if the performance would come across as cheesy or over the top, or just trying to get you to cry. But here, what I see Shirley MacLaine in terms of endearment. I feel like that doesn't exist without Barbara Stanwyck in Stella Dallas. She is advanced. Yeah. She's doing what you will see 50 years later, right? So that just was what stood out to me.
She was ahead of her time.
She sure was.
Very much so. I will also just note that when it comes to thinking about what I'm going to say about performances, typically I'm I know this, I can point to this, this, and this, and I know all the reasons why this is good or why this is bad. But I feel like sometimes there is a performance that I watch and I kind of struggle to really put into words what it is that she's doing. And, obviously that can be a bad thing if I truly I don't know what this person is doing. They don't know what the script really is.
Or they don't know either.
But I think in this, right. But in this case, I think it's because you watch this film and you're so wrapped up, I think, in the personal journey of this woman and the way she evolves over 20 years or however long it this is, of being this woman who wants to get married to a rich guy and wants that high status life. And then by the end, still sort of having that kind of laser focus on something, but it's really aimed at her wanting her daughter to have a better life and give that to her. And I think it's so compelling because of her and because the way she really never overplays any of that melodrama. You know, even when she has some very Beatty classic acting showcases towards the end of the film, she has, I'm going to say what I said with Greta Garbo, she has that X factor that is so undefinable for me. But I think it's because she just understood the character she was playing. She understood all of the complexities and the desperation of this woman who just wants a better life, and maybe she's sometimes focused on the wrong thing, or she makes some really hard choices, but she owns them. And I feel like she feels like a real person to me, even though this is a melodrama with some really heightened emotions. It's still strangely grounded because of what she brings to it.
She feels like any person that you could meet, or anyone's mom that like they're telling you about their relationship with their mother and what that's like. I think that I'm also struggling to like find the right words to describe this performance. I can like give like specific scenes and what she's doing, but I think it is just because the character also in particular, it's not, to me, this script isn't that well written. Like, this movie isn't that, amazing. It's a good movie. Right. I did like it. But I feel like this movie just isn't successful without her bringing that truth to the character and not like performing in a way that is like it doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like she is this woman. And I know that's so cliche, and that is what people will say about good performances all the time. But here I think, it's great.
Yeah, I think she's good through the first half of the film, but really, I guess the most compelling parts for me come in the second half, where she's older, Laurel is grown up, and they have a close relationship, and they have a really nice chemistry with each other, her and Anne Shirley, where she is so maternal and so warm with her. But then, Laurel wanting to branch out and live her own life. They're on this trip, and Stella goes to find Laurel out at this local diner, and Stella is like really all dolled up, dressed to the nines, just very excessive. And she's kind of like walking around aimlessly trying to find her daughter, and Laurel is just so mortified when she realizes that the person that her friends are making fun of is her mother.
Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking. Like, I wanted to look away. I've seen this film multiple times, and I always this is like one of the scenes that I will always remember from this film, is that really secondhand embarrassment moment.
Yeah, that one, it is really bad. When she comes in and she bounces that ball, it's like the first thing you see, and you're like, oh my God, this is just like, there's no way for this woman to not get attention. That's really hard. But the scene when they're on the train too, and they overhear the girls talking about her, and she pretends to be asleep for Laurel. That is just the most heartbreaking scene for me in this movie, besides the ending. That is always where I'm like, okay, I'm trying not to cry. Like, do not cry yet.
Yeah. And then I guess to sort of bridge those two scenes, there is that really great scene between the two of them in their room together, and Stella really not knowing what she did wrong, or like why Laurel is so upset, and the way she's still just trying to comfort her daughter anyway. It's like, it genuinely is moving to me. And as effective as a film that I could watch today. And that I can't always say that about classic film. There can be a little bit of distance because of, obviously how old some of these films are. You can't always translate the same kinds of emotions and the same styles. But in moments like that, it's very universal feeling.
It really is. And you hear it so often, like throughout the film, but especially near the end, just all of these people talking about their impressions of her as a mother and their judgments of her But what we've seen the whole time is that even when Stella is the messiest of messes, she ultimately cares about Laurel more than anything else. And that is what is so hard about it. And the hard part too is that, you know, Laurel, even as she's growing up, knows that. But it's hard for Stella to believe that.
Yeah, it's really, really devastating. And even the way that Barbara Stanwyck modulates that scene of her eventually getting to the point of bursting into tears, it feels so earned at that moment that would be her final, just like, I don't know how to help you at this point. And so, yeah, and then obviously the train is just really, it's so many different emotions. That moment of realization on her face is, she doesn't have to say anything, and yet she is still saying everything with that one facial gesture, and then her having to sort of shield it. It's genuinely quite upsetting.
It really is. It's so much.
Well, then, of course, we have the final scene.
Oh my God.
And the final scene is just, it's just everything. I mean, it's such a memorable ending for me, where she's made this sacrifice of really pushing her daughter away and pretending she doesn't really care about her anymore. It's almost going back to that like dog metaphor of like, like, no, I don't want you anymore. I'm going off and hanging out with Ed now. Like, I'm doing my own thing. And Laurel is just kind of like confused and really upset about that. But the reason Stella's doing this is because she just wants her daughter to have the best life and the happiest life she can. And she knows that Laurel she seems more comfortable in those situations than Stella does. So she just wants the best life for her daughter. But then, you know, obviously Laurel gets married, and Stella is just so happy and feels like she's earned exactly why she did this in the first place. And watching her through the window, like she doesn't even attend her daughter's own wedding, but she's still able to at least see it. I'm glad that she figured out where it was. But, you know, but just like the tears in her eyes, it's so, again, crystallizes the entire performance in a similar way as like Irene Dunne. It's like, wow, like that ending is earned. And I guess Greta Garbo, I mean, truly, actually, this is a category with a lot of great final scenes for these actresses. So
Definitely. I would say especially those three, but here, like, she really just knocks it out of the park. Like, this is just, when I think of like capital A acting, like that's what this is. Like, to be able to have those honestly gut-wrenching emotions and to be able to cry like that, and the way she's like biting the handkerchief, it is just, oh my gosh, it's like almost traumatic to watch. And it's just so much, and knowing what they've been through, and you can see how proud she is of her daughter in that moment, but also, you know, that sadness that this is the only way that she believes she can be with her, and thinking that that's what would be best for her. There's just so much there in that mother-daughter relationship, and it just, it really, really wrecked me.
Yeah, it really does. And you can say it's a melodrama. It's going for those emotions, obviously. But I think in this case, especially because of her, it's earned. It really earns that ending. It earns your tears, I guess.
I fully agree.
Yeah. And you can see why she would get all the critical praise that she got from this, and why she would really just continue growing further as an actress and getting so many different kinds of roles, and really showing that she could mold herself into any real genre that she's a part of. Like, you look at this and you look at like Double Indemnity, right, and you're like, this is the same actress. Wild.
Right. What an amazing first nomination too. Like, to have this.
Oh yeah.
Oh my God.
Truly, I mean, A Star Is Born, if we're gonna go there. But the New York Times said about this, they said, Miss Stanwyck's portrayal is as courageous as it is fine.
I love that.
Courage.
Yeah. Courageous, yes. I think that's the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah. So there you go. I mean, truly lots of glowing praise for all of these performances, including our winner, which we will get to in just a bit. But anything else on Barbara Stanwyck?
I don't think so right now. I feel like I'm still struggling to find the words to describe her. And maybe when we get to some questions, I'll have more.
Okay, Sophia, it's time.
Oh, no.
It's time to get to our winner of 1937 Best Actress. And that is, of course, Luise Rainer for The Good Earth. Alrighty. So, I am not even going to beat around the bush. I was dreading rewatching this because I don't know how many people know this, but I rank this performance as the worst Best Actress win of all time. So there's that. I think just on a fundamental level, this film is kind of a failure because of its casting. And like, you know, just because it has the veneer of prestige, you know, based on a Pulitzer Prize winning novel and all the expectations that come with that, doesn't mean that it isn't just like fundamentally racist. And, you know, having white actors play Chinese characters, layering on pounds of makeup, some of them resorting to stereotypes, but it was a big prestige picture at the time, capital I important, and I think Luise Rainer was seen as a real powerhouse actress between this and The Great Ziegfeld, with a lot of range. So, The Good Earth, for those who are blessed to have not seen it, is about a Chinese family. There is a farmer played by Paul Mooney who marries Olan, Luise Rainer. She is a slave who works for the biggest family in the village, and he ends up doing very well for himself. They have children. She's a very dutiful wife, very quiet and stoic and humble, and, you know, they end up going through famine, but they finally get back to some level of stability again. And then her husband, his attention wanders over to this young woman, Lotus, who he wants as his second wife. And there's just all this infighting within the family. Eventually, there's a big invasion of locusts, which I guess brings everybody together again. And there's like some level of reconciliation, but doesn't feel earned, I would say. But I've certainly expressed my thoughts on The Good Earth. I talked about it on the Best Picture series as well. Not a big fan. What are your thoughts on this film and our big Best Actress winner of the year?
All right. So there's Sandra Bullock in The Blind Side. There's Mary Pickford in Coquette. And there's Luise Rainer in The Good Earth. I don't know if you knew this about me either, but she's my least favorite winner in this category too.
Wow.
Yeah, and it isn't just about the problematic racist things that are happening here. I think that anytime, even today, something racist is happening in a movie, you can't pin it all on one actor. It is, you know, a system of moving parts and people who are making bad decisions that get you to this point. That is not the only reason why I don't like this performance. I do not think this performance is effective at all. And for a movie that is this long and for
2 hours and 20 minutes,
it is,
for the record.
you never see anything different from her. It is the exact same face and the same. You don't get anything different or varied. You don't see any range. You don't really even see any emotion. I think it's just all kind of asleep to me. It doesn't feel, and I know I'm being mean about it, but I could get meaner.
Gotta be honest. Yeah. Well, we'll see. This is a tough one. This is a tough one because honestly, the makeup and the whole fact of her in this role that she has no business being in the first place can be very distracting. That it really takes away from what she's doing in the performance itself. I will say this to start out with a positive or two. Obviously, the primary emotion that she is asked to portray is exhaustion.
Yeah.
And that is very much reflected throughout the entire performance. As you said, pretty much from beginning to end, she is in some form of exhaustion and weariness. And she would want a day to just like sleep in, you know, but she never really gets that.
Yeah. I just feel too, like my thing when I was watching this, I was like, I would love to, you know, get her a breakfast sandwich, some Excedrin, a water bottle, like whatever hangover she's fighting here. That's what this reminded me of. I was like, I want to help you through this.
Yes. So, I mean, I guess she fulfills that aspect of the performance well enough, right? I mean, the other thing is the first time I watched this, I can't even say that I fully understood why she even won for this role. Like what it was about her performance that stood out, because it's such a passive character, so mild-mannered that like I can't even say I understood this win at that level.
Yeah.
But on this rewatch, I feel like it clicked into place a little more. I mean, obviously I know intellectually that there's something showy about her transforming her appearance and those elements that the Academy tends to like. But I feel like on this rewatch, I did grasp a little more of what made this such a standout for voters to want to already give her another Oscar. First of all, obviously, it's vastly different from what she won for the Grace Ziegfeld. And watching both that and this, and watching that in chronological order this time, it really is astonishing how differently she performs here. And there is such a heaviness, such a dramatic weight that even if I really don't connect with the film at all or the performance, I can see why an audience in 1937 would just sort of be taken aback by it. And what she was able to do in terms of the physicality aspect. You know, she has to reflect so much about this woman who barely speaks any lines in the entire 140 minutes of this movie. And I give her credit for at least staying consistent in being locked into that character and that emotion. The problem is, though, as you were kind of alluding to there, that it's consistent to a fault. Like, it's a very one-note performance.
Yeah.
And if I'm being honest, I don't even think she really creates much of a character beyond that one note of, I'm tired. Like,
It's true.
She's lived a long life, a hard life. She's always had to work. She was a slave. Now she's a mother. Now she's a wife, and always having to attend to all of her duties. So she's always tired. What else is there?
Yeah, I agree. And I just feel like it is hard because this character, I mean, the material she's given to work with also is just, I mean, she barely has any lines. Her first lines in the movie are, I am with child and I shall prepare food now. It's like she's not getting Irene Dunne improvised some of her great lines, but, you know, she's not getting this material to work with, even though it did win the Pulitzer. But I watched an interview with her as a 100-year-old through the TCM festival, and that actually helped me to try to understand what her process was and where she was coming from. And she said that she doesn't really believe in wearing masks. She's someone who really works from the inside. She does smaller gestures. She said she wanted to really think about what does a farm woman like this feel, and she wanted her performance to be really grounded and just connected to her surroundings. That helped me still, I guess, understand a little bit more of her style and where she was coming from here. But it just does not connect with me at all. And it's just something that I don't understand it.
Yeah, that does make sense. It's just, it never really transcends past the sort of stock character type of the dutiful wife sort of thing,
right.
You know?
And I think too, if you don't have a lot of lines, you can change up the way you're communicating with your eyes, the way that we've talked about how Garbo and Barbara Stanwyck were doing that. You can, I think, get creative in that way and lean into those emotions. But I do think what you said too about just the transformation that's the biggest part for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the kind of thing where I would imagine in the book, which I haven't read, but I imagine we would get a clearer picture of who she is and how she really feels about her husband, who is an absolute asshole, I must say.
Yeah, no.
But like why she's motivated to even get up in the morning at this point, like all these things I feel like we could have gotten into her head more, that film doesn't really work to translate that emotion.
Right.
I mean, I don't know what the perspective is in the book, but
I haven't read the book either. I did attempt at one point, but it didn't finish. But
fair.
Even scenes where we are supposed to be getting some sort of connection from her or emotion, like connection to something that's happening, like the scene with the pearls, for example, she looks nauseated. Like she doesn't look I don't know what she's trying to tell me about these pearls that are in front of us.
Yeah, you would think that would be a more positive expression of emotion, and yet it's the same face. It's the same body language. I mean, I think occasionally we get like some hint of like a crack of a smile, like when she's like with her family and just sort of relaxed a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, there's no variation. There's nothing we can really say about like pointing out one scene over another being good.
Yeah, watching that video with the TCM Film Festival made me really sad because she actually did, I feel like she had so much personality in that I was like, okay, this exists for you. I just don't know what you're doing here in this role specifically.
Yeah, I think for as much as I can say she's consistent, I think one of the reasons I dislike the performance as much as I do is because it's so mannered. Like every facial gesture, the way she carries herself, like I said, the body language, the way she speaks, it feels like she's put a lot of thought into all of it. And you contrast that with what we just talked about, Barbara Stanwyck, and it's truly apples and oranges in the most extreme way, I think. You know, I'm not constantly thinking about all the choices people like Barbara Stanwyck are making as a performer, or Irene Dunne, or Carole Lombard, or Claudette Colbert. I mean, obviously I love a theatrical performer who is like truly forceful, like a Glenn Close, obviously, or a Bette Davis, or Jane Fonda. I love that type too, that intensity of emotion. But it's like performances like this with Luise Rainer and Meryl Streep in The Iron Lady, like obviously so many others on the male acting side of things, that I find myself, as an person who follows the Oscars like we do, I find myself very rarely on board with this kind of performance that gets attention at the Oscars because it's so obvious. It's just everything they do it doesn't transcend in the way that a good actor should, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's correct. And I can just tell she doesn't want this role. That's ultimately what this is. Yeah. It's just she didn't want it. She was kind of forced into it, didn't turn it down, and she, I think, felt uncomfortable about it and studied up, and this is what happened, which is super unfortunate, I think.
Yeah. I'm not saying if, like, I want it to be unrealistic and have her get into, like, this big melodramatic argument or, like, act in a way that's out of character. But it's sort of a lose-lose situation here where the material really isn't there for her to really show her range, and also she's not offering much variation with what she does have. So it's a performance that doesn't work. And I think I'm gradually starting to understand why it does work for the people that I know who are fans of this performance. But there's such a lack of emotion and personal investment in this character, and a lot of that has to fall on her, I'm sorry to say, but it just does.
I agree with that. And I feel, you know, if you like this performance, like, I'm very happy for you, right? That you have a winner that you really love. But yeah, it just doesn't connect with me. And I mean, Paul Mooney's performance doesn't either. So it's not the movie as a whole, I think, really just falters for me. And the performances are just a big part of that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot we can get into about Anna May Wong really lobbying to play this part and getting turned down by the producers because they'd already cast Paul Mooney and there were rules against miscegenation because of the Hays Code. Would have loved to have seen her play this role, especially because of the kinds of roles that Hollywood had cast her in before this. I think it would have been a really fascinating departure for her. They offered her the part of Lotus, and she actually said, like, you're asking me with Chinese blood to do the only unsympathetic role in the picture, featuring an all-American cast portraying Chinese characters. Which, I mean, good for her for turning that down. It's such an insult.
Yeah, I'm so happy that she turned that down. I think just learning about Anna May Wong, reading about her more, I had always kind of wondered, years ago when I looked at this role and when I first watched this performance when I was working my way through, just hearing about her, it is just so sad that this happened to her and that the reason why wasn't because, she wasn't talented enough. It wasn't because she wasn't a good fit for the role. She was the fit for the role. She was the perfect choice. And the fact that Paul Mooney and like the men at the studio ruined that for her it's so sad to me. And I think, part of me is happy for Anna May Wong that she didn't have to be a part of something like The Good Earth, which doesn't work as a movie for me. But I do always think about the potential of it if you did have Anna May Wong as Olan, what she could have brought to that role, because I do think her interpretation and her desire to take on the part would have given us a completely different performance. And without Paul Mooney there too, could have been the movie that could have been, the potential that is there.
Right. Truly. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we need a remake of The Good Earth, but I think like a more modern interpretation, if you want to do that with more sensitivity to all angles, really, because this, was not exactly well thought out as a film, I don't think. But I think if you want to do that, that's well within your right to do that. If there are any filmmakers out there who are like, let's have an actual true interpretation of The Good Earth on film.
Right. And I don't do Ryan Murphy shows, but apparently in Hollywood he tried to rewrite Anna May Wong's story in this way.
Yep.
So.
Yep. It was. I'm not going to get into it. Let's sort of transition into why she won this. Talking about the sort of awards race up to that point. It is actually funny looking at Inside Oscar about how Irene Dunne said that she wasn't going to attend. She was going to be off in New York. She said she couldn't wait to be off to New York, did not want to go. Greta Garbo famously couldn't have cared less about this sort of thing. She said she was already booked for a trip to Italy and she was not changing those plans, and that's fair. But what's funny is that she was considered the front runner, Greta Garbo, to win this. A lot of people saying this is her best performance, this is the time. But MGM really went to bat for Luise to win this, even though Greta Garbo also at MGM, but they prioritized Luise. I mean, do we think that's a major part of her victory here?
I do. I think that's really the key to it all is MGM. And, obviously we loved Irene Dunne and Barbara Stanwyck, I think in particular, from how we've been talking about them being free agents really and not having that backing of a studio that was just the only thing really that mattered then in terms of Oscar campaigning. And then, Garbo and Louis B. Mayer had such a rocky relationship at that point because, like I'd said earlier, she advocated for herself and didn't really care about all of this. And he really looked to Luise Rainer to be a replacement for Garbo, which is just beyond me. I have no idea why you would think that was possible. Anyway. So I do think that's part of it. That's the biggest part of it. But one thing that I did read in Inside Oscar that I thought was fascinating was that Capra got rid of this 50-person nominating committee and really expanded the voting body. So all guild members could vote. went from like 800 voters to 15,000, with a majority of them, 12,000, being extras. So you just think of that voting block from MGM and Louis B. Mayer being like, here, you vote for the home team, and we are voting for Luise Rainer. And they're like, okay, even though we can't afford to come to the ceremony, all right, great. Like,
yes, sir.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is that Luise Rainer also didn't really want to play the game very much, just like Greta Garbo. And yet Louis B. Mayer and everyone was still just sort of trying to sort of force her into doing as much as she can to promote the film, which she didn't really. But it's just interesting that, like, she was in some way like a replacement for Greta Garbo in the sense that, like, she didn't really want to do the whole show business aspect of it. She was more about the work, to the extent that she straight up left Hollywood a few years after winning this second Oscar.
Right. It is odd when you think about a lot of these nominees really, their careers didn't last much longer. They retired early, and that, I think, speaks to how challenging it was to be an actress in Hollywood at this time, operating within or outside of the studio system. But yeah, for Luise to win back-to-back Oscars and then just be like, goodbye, I'm out of here.
Peace.
Right? It's like the great Oscar curse, that myth, right? That, of course, starts with Luise.
Exactly.
But yeah, it is really interesting to win back-to-back Oscars in this way and then to just disappear.
Yeah. Also, Luise was not at the Oscars at the night that she won, just like the previous year, actually. So she once again had to be called at home, and they rushed her over to accept, which I'm glad that she was, like, local enough to get there in time. But it's just so funny to me that, like, even Hollywood's biggest night, we have, like, all these glamorous stars who are just like, I do not want to attend this. I don't have time. I'm going to Italy. I'm going to be in New York. Like, I have better things to do with my time.
Yeah.
When you compare that to now, it's just like, if you're not, like, based in Europe, you're going to the Oscars.
Right. Yeah. I thought about that, especially with this year and this past year, trying to figure out how everyone could get there. And, like, that being this huge storyline that was happening. And back then I was like, no, I'm good. Gonna just take my trip.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there is inherently a baitiness to what Luise is doing in her performance, even if you want to set aside the MGM of it all. That is just like, wow, look at this incredible transformation. This woman who just arrived in Hollywood, who we just gave an Oscar for this glitzy, showboaty kind of performance of her playing like a singer and an entertainer. And now here she is playing a Chinese farmer, and it's like 1 year to the next that this is happening. I don't think you can really resist that if you're in 1937 and how we feel now about representation in Hollywood. Obviously, there were still some people who were against it at that time, which is important to contextualize, but it wasn't nearly as vocal as we are now.
Right. And even thinking about just the type of role that it was for a person like Luise, I read this quote from Silver Screen magazine, where she was known to the public as a Viennese glamour girl, but it is a measure of Miss Reiner's artistic integrity that she became a Chinese peasant, mother of a starving brood. Can you imagine your Garbos and Dietrichs and Crawfords playing Olan?
Exactly. So this is the kind of praise that she was getting for, like, look at this woman, she will dig deep as an actor to portray someone of a different race or, you know, portray someone of a different socioeconomic class. And yeah, I think that's really, she was considered like the actor's actor at this point, even compared to all these great icons that are in this category. It still felt like, oh, Luise, she is the special one here. She is the new person that was going to have such a long career. She's going to be the grande dame of Hollywood with all these great roles. We're going to give her so much, and then she's just like, bye.
Yeah, she really struggled, like, with Louis B. Mayer and with Hollywood, and I understand why she left, and really, I mean, on a good note, after 2 Oscars, but yeah. She said she didn't want to be a tool in his factory anymore, and that's how she felt. So I'm glad she can or at least as of a couple of years ago, could speak out on that and talk about her experience. Right. But this performance will always be an inexplicable decision to me.
Yes. Yes. Well, let's get to some Twitter questions. We got a whole bunch because this is a popular year. We'll kind of do a rapid fire here. Okay. Fritz said, "Is this the greatest lineup so far?"
I think so. I actually do think this is a great lineup. Despite not loving the winner, I love the other nominees.
I think so far, yes. Having done this Best Actress series, I think this is probably pound for pound, like so many great nominees. I mean, Luise, we talked about it, but otherwise, this is a lineup I would happily watch again. I think a lot of these performances have endured compared to a lot of the other lineups that we've talked about. So absolutely, I think so far the greatest lineup. I don't want to say of all time by any means, but of the 30s, maybe. We could have that conversation. So this is from Patrick Stokes. "Is this the most inexplicable decision in Oscar history? I don't know how you choose between Garbo and Stanwyck this year, but this is not the answer."
Well, I almost just quoted this.
Yeah, right? I don't know about inexplicable, but for me, the thing is just unnecessary is what I would say.
Yeah. To me, like in this category, I would say yes. But like in Oscar history, overall decisions, I think there are worse ones in other categories for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. Ben Miller. "Is this the cringiest of Best Actress wins? Also, in hindsight, Gaynor wins this in a walk, right?"
So I would say yes to cringiest Best Actress wins. Summarizing everything we talked about, especially I would say as a white woman playing a Chinese woman, that is the biggest thing there for cringe factor for me. Yeah. Gaynor does not win in a walk, though, to me. We can maybe get there later, but I don't think so.
I'll say the racist aspects of it, very cringy. I could see that argument. I honestly find Sandra Bullock's win to be really cringeworthy for so many reasons.
It's really bad.
That, like, I think that's a problem, especially that coming in 2009. So I'll say they're tied. How about that?
I think that's good.
Yeah. Baby Clyde said, "Why did the Academy hate Irene Dunne?"
Ugh, I don't know.
Because she was too good and everyone was jealous. It's the same reason they hated Cary Grant.
Yeah, she's too fun. She's too, like, of the people, I feel. Like, she's not to say she's not a star, because she is, especially in my eyes, but I think that's, like, part of it to me. But then also, she just had really hard competition, and competition that was, like, very much, like, studio favorites going up against her. So I think it's just unfortunate timing, too. But I love Irene Dunne.
I love her so much. But she really did face a lot of tough competition. Listen, I'm going to just bring it up again. That's what some people say when it comes to Glenn Close. She's always facing tough competition. And that's just how it shakes out sometimes. Sometimes you get a really weak year and you can just steamroll the competition. And sometimes you're always second or always third. So this is from Calum Reed. "Was this Irene Dunne's best chance at winning an Oscar?"
I think it was. Possibly. Yeah. I think this is her best performance and her best movie. And alongside the best director win for Leo McCarey, it feels like this is her best chance, as opposed to some of her other nominations. We had the movies weren't as popular, or she was up against maybe even tougher competition than Luise for a second win.
Right. I'll say this. Not to, like, get too far ahead, I don't really think she was ever even the runner-up.
Yeah.
As much as I hate to say it, let alone having, like, a great chance of winning in any of her 5 years. I hate to say it, but I sort of think the closest she might have come to is Cimarron.
Oof. And that
does not make me feel good. Yeah. But, like, based on what they tend to like.
That's true.
You know? So let's move on. I don't like to live in that world.
That's sad.
Let's move on to Chelsea. "Do you prefer The Awful Truth or Theodora Goes Wild?" The Awful Truth.
Me too. That's, like, a pretty easy one. To, like your quote earlier about the Alp. Awful Truth.
Exactly. Yes. But honestly, what a double feature.
Yeah.
That's some good stuff right there, either way.
Everyone in that movie just snapped. I love it.
Yes. They did what had to be done. This is from Fritz. Why did a legend such as Greta Garbo never win? She was too cool for school, I think. She didn't even play the game, as we talked about.
Yeah.
Part of me even wonders if her being the biggest star in the world led to some backlash, maybe, or some feelings of resentment, possibly, that, like, you know, she's already the biggest name in movies. We don't really need to give her a trophy on top of everything else. Like, almost like we see with people like Bradley Cooper, like, losing over and over because, like, why does he need the accolades on top of being good looking and now becoming a director and a writer and a producer? Like, who do you think you are? We don't need to give you a trophy. Come on.
Talk about heartbreaking losses for me. Anything to do with Bradley Cooper. But yeah, I think part of it...
That is why I invoked him.
I love it. Thank you. I think part of it too for Greta is like, I think this like, I want to be alone, mysterious aura has more consequences if you're a woman. I think when you're a man, like if you're like Daniel Day-Lewis and you're like known for being reclusive and having this type of life, people almost admire it and like it's this artistic skill that you have. But with her, I feel like people just wanted to kind of invade her space and solve that mystery and they couldn't do it. And kind of like you said, she's too cool for the Academy. It's kind of like a Stanley Kubrick never winning Best Director case, I feel, for her.
Yeah, very true. This is from Joey Gentili. Who is Camille? Where is she? As disappointing of a name as the Pumpkin Eater.
Oh my God.
A fair point.
This is such a good question. So
it has to do with the plant, right?
Yes.
The camellias plant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason why I was laughing too is because I was confused by this. Like, who is Camille as well? And then I was kind of wondering why Greta Garbo would kind of shove her face in these flowers. Like a lot. Very frequently at the beginning. And it's to invoke the name. Yeah. There we go. Camille.
So, that's what Camille is. She is not Camille. Greta Garbo is not Camille.
Greta Garbo is Marguerite.
Right. In Camille.
Yeah.
Even though, it's very confusing. But Zeta Short, how insufferable is Marguerite Gautier? You said she was insufferable a little bit as a character before this.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't Greta Garbo, you know, she could have been even more insufferable.
She really could have. I think Garbo really helps the case, but there are some points where, I really struggled with her. Like, when there's a part where they're talking about wedding vows and she just agrees with him and then he asks her to marry him and she says, what? Or like she says, I was only thinking of you. I wasn't thinking of myself. It's like, you're always thinking about yourself. Just
right. Oh yeah.
Admit that. Yep. Comparing him to a dog, like so much of it is, it's funny to me watching it, but you know, it's not meant to be funny. I don't think she is a little bit insufferable as a character.
Yep. Eric Maxwell Brunn said, did Barbara Stanwyck not win because it seemed like the Academy wasn't over the moon for the film? I don't think that necessarily impacted things. We've already talked about Best Actress winners that have won for films that weren't really that embraced by the Academy, like Helen Hayes for The Sin of Madeleine Claudet and Murray Dresser for Min and Bill. I guess Mary Pickford for Coquette, but that's a different story. We know full well that obviously being in a Best Picture nominee tends to help, but it's not everything.
I agree with you. I think that's a good way, you know, if you're predicting today, that's definitely a key indicator you look for, but back then it just didn't really matter, I don't think, in the same way, especially because Stella Dallas was a really popular movie. It ended up becoming like a radio show after, because it was so popular, especially with women. So I feel this has more to do with Barbara Stanwyck being somewhat of a newcomer to the Academy, this being her first nomination, and also being a free agent.
Gabe Guarin said, between Garbo, Dunne, and Stanwyck, who do you think came closest to winning an Oscar in their careers?
This is really tough.
I'm going to say Garbo. Actually, in 1930 for Anna Christie, I think, was the runner-up, I would guess. So came close there. I think she came close here. Maybe even she came close for Ninotchka in 1939, I would guess. So I think she had more opportunities to get to that winning position, certainly more so than Irene Dunne, and probably Barbara Stanwyck too. That's what I would guess.
I agree. To me, Barbara Stanwyck has just really bad luck here with her years as well. But Garbo just having the presence that she did. I also love Ninotchka for her. That wasn't going to beat Vivien Leigh in Gone with the Wind, of course, but right. I think she came the closest considering her competition and who she was.
Owen Daly said, "Why do you think Garbo, Stanwyck, or Dunne never won an Oscar during their lifetimes?" So now we get into the why. It is annoying. It really is. And especially to give another one to Luise Rainer here. And I don't think that future success or future career should necessarily impact giving out awards in the here and now, in the present, because we have no way of predicting that, like what they're going to do in the future. I'm sure Luise Rainer coming out with these two vastly different performances that people were excited about, voters were probably just really fascinated by like Luise Rainer as this next great dramatic actress, and it just didn't happen. But, you know, obviously we have the hindsight that we have now, and it is really sad that these three icons of classic Hollywood never got their proper due at the Oscars. And I think some of it might be the types of roles. Some of it might just be their reputation, you know, the competition, like you said. But I think this was a great opportunity to reward at least one of them, and they blew it.
Yes, that is what's so hard about this year, is you have an opportunity to make one of these icons an Oscar winner, and you don't do it. So I think, you know, for the why, there are always a lot of reasons behind that I think we've gone through, like studio politics and competition, standing, etc. But yeah, I think sometimes you don't also know, I think, how good people are and what their long-lasting reputation is going to be until it's just too late to give them one anymore.
John T. said, Dunne, Garbo, and Stanwyck are generally considered to be three of the best Golden Age stars to never win a competitive Oscar. In terms of their overall careers, which actress's snub do you think was the biggest Oscar flub?
Ooh. I feel that I think it has to be this year. I really do. So one of them not winning here, I won't get into who I would vote for or who I think the runner-up is. But I do think it takes place in this year, because every other case for them, I can more easily see why the Academy did what they did, or why they didn't win or weren't even the runner-up in some cases.
Yes. I think Barbara Stanwyck really should have gotten one.
I do too.
And regardless, just in terms of, like, I love all three of them. It's really sad that she never got one. That's all I'm going to say on that.
I think, too, thinking about her, like, getting to another movie, I would have given her the win for Double Indemnity that year. I also, like, tough Ingrid call, Bergman has 3. Yeah. And... Well,
in that case, the other 2 are unnecessary.
They really are. They're not good.
I'm fine with the Gaslight one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I see what you're saying. Best Picture cast said, if you could sub in one of the other 4 nominees as the lead in A Star is Born, who would you pick?
I'm going with Barbara Stanwyck. I feel like that would be a fascinating movie, especially since, you know, as the story goes, this is loosely based on her relationship with Frank Fay when she first started out in Hollywood. So I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, honestly, any of them would be interesting. I don't know how that would work for Greta Garbo, but the others I could see. Well, some of this is a little redundant, but Andrew Carden said thoughts on why Stella Dallas might have received such a lukewarm reception in nominations. They tend to be kind of hot and cold on melodramas and quote-unquote women's pictures. Yeah. So, you know, they don't always get the respect that they deserve.
I agree. And they, at this time too, they loved like prestige pictures, like The Life of Emile Zola. It's like,
yeah,
okay.
Sure. Fine. Let's see. Kevin Clowder. What is the best way to judge the effectiveness of a performance in yellowface, considering it's a technique that has become mostly extinct and also considered immoral?
I think that we kind of tried to do that when we were talking through Luise's performance and what didn't work for us. I think, just considering the decision making that goes into taking a role like that and deciding to cast a white actor in that role, I think just looking at the decisions that the actor is making in the performance, right? Are they actively making decisions about the role while they're on screen in front of you? Are they leaning hard on stereotypes? Those are things I think that I'm looking for in this performance, and ultimately why it doesn't work for me.
I don't think that ignoring it is productive per se, the yellow face aspect. I think it's best to acknowledge that it's there and to contextualize it at the same time and really try to look beneath the surface, like you're saying, however distracting it might be. And for some viewers, it's all they see. And I don't blame them for not being able to really see past that.
Right.
But to, see intention and look to see if they're leaning into stereotypes. Yeah, exactly. Which, I mean, I don't know how much of a stereotype she's leaning into per se, but it's sort of that. It's like, obviously there's the initial offense of her playing a Chinese woman. I don't know if it gets beyond that, anything offensive on her part compared to Paul Muni, at least.
Right.
But,
yeah. Paul Mooney's the serious offender, I would say, in that case.
Yes. Yeah. Christoph N. said, how much of the vitriol that Luise Rainer is getting these days for this win is for something she has no control over other than not refusing the part, rather than her actual performance? I think a significant portion of it is that, to be fair. But to be honest, it's so integral to what it is to begin with that I don't know how you can separate it.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. I mean, I think I can fully understand why people would have vitriol for that and feel that it is warranted. I mean, I get that.
Marcel said, which performance of all back-to-back wins is the most deserving? Reiner, Hepburn, Tracy, or Hanks?
I would say Hepburn here for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and The Lion in Winter. Lion in Winter is one of my favorite all-time wins. So
yeah, I would say I have the least problems with that one. The others three have a performance that I'm not the biggest of fans of. But if I were to rank it, I would say Tom Hanks probably right behind Katharine Hepburn, and then honestly put Luise Rainer and Spencer Tracy and tied for last because I don't like either of those performances.
I think I would say the same thing.
Last one, Gabe Guarin. How close were actresses like Ginger Rogers, Beulah Bondi, and Jean Arthur to getting nominations this year? So, for context, that's Ginger Rogers in Stage Door, Beulah Bondi in Make Way for Tomorrow, and Jean Arthur for History is Made at Night. All great performances. I would say probably Beulah Bondi might have come close. She was nominated in Supporting the year before and the year after this. So, and that's just a really incredible performance.
Yeah. I would say, I hope Beulah Bondi was close. I can't really see anyone else cracking this 5 just based on what they were going for that year and just because of the way that Make Way for Tomorrow was perceived at the time or received at the time. Ginger Rogers could have been close to based on what they thought of Stage Door, but that could also just be wishful thinking.
I mean, she never got in for any of her actually entertaining films.
Yeah, that's very true. And my girl Jean Arthur, I don't think she was close either.
I know. I would have loved that, obviously, as a stan. But all right, well, we're running long, so it's time to do our final segment. I apologize, but there's so much to talk about with this year.
So much.
Here we go. So let's figure this out. Who we think was the runner-up to Luise Rainer? Sophia, give me your verdict.
My verdict, I think it was Greta Garbo. I think this was the best opportunity she had, which makes me really sad that it came down to this. But, she won the New York Film Critics Circle Award for this performance. She got amazing reviews, was really loved at the time. Also did have some MGM backing, you could guess. wasn't as strong. But yeah, I'm going to say Garbo. What about you?
I am also going to say Greta Garbo was the runner-up here because of MGM and because she was considered the favorite going into the Oscars, and she just had the best reviews of her career for this film. And I think a performance like Irene Dunne in The Awful Truth, quite frankly, just doesn't really win Oscars.
Mm-hmm.
At least for lead actress, anyway. Like, supporting, absolutely. Like, there's plenty of examples of this kind of like screwball energy happening in supporting actress, but I think those are probably, I would guess, the only two that were in contention. I would love to say Barbara Stanwyck was too, but I don't know if she was just too new in general compared to the rest of the group.
Yeah, I think that if I would have been like predicting, if there were predictors in 1937, I would have predicted Irene Dunne, unfortunately, because I would have, thought, okay, she can do it. She created this performance, and it would just be what I was attached to, but it was not going to happen, unfortunately.
Hope dicting.
Exactly.
Yes.
Hope dicting and Best Actress.
Yes.
Never happened before.
Right. Well, final question for you. Who would you have voted for from this iconic lineup?
This is so hard for me, and to tell you the truth, when we started recording, I didn't know who I was going to pick. And
wow.
I have to stick with what I initially thought I would go with, which is Barbara Stanwyck for Stella Dallas. It pains me because I really, Irene Dunne is so close. Maybe I'll change my answer in 30 seconds, but I'm going to try to be firm and say Barbara Stanwyck and Stella Dallas. I think she's reaching for something completely new here, and for that to be her first nomination, that's the performance that sticks with me in the most powerful way, I would say, as much as I love Irene Dunne.
So I was rewatching these films more or less in order of alphabetical, and rewatching Irene Dunne again, I was like, there's no way I'm not giving it to Irene Dunne. This is an incredible performance. And then I get to Barbara Stanwyck, and I'm like, damn it.
That's what happened to me too.
She truly transcended. I mean, the way we glowingly spoke about her should indicate that it was between obviously these two, but especially for Barbara, I think really entered a new style of acting almost in what she was able to express with a character that I imagine not a lot of actresses could make so compelling, but she did. And this is the win that I give Barbara Stanwyck. She was robbed.
She was robbed. Completely robbed. Ugh.
So there you have it. Thank you so much, Sophia, for doing this. I really, really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. I love this lineup, and we brought the takes.
We did.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun. I love talking about all of these actresses, and I do have to say that, I'm thinking about Luise and her win maybe in a new way. I have come to love the performances that I've always loved even more. So thank you again so much for having me.
Of course. And where can people find more of you on the internet?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter at Sophia_Sim, C-I-M. That's where you can find my personal account, where I'll be tweeting about Bradley Cooper and classic Hollywood outfits that I love. Also, you can find my podcast that I host at Oscar Wilde Pod on Twitter and Instagram, and our episodes drop every Thursday, so check that out as well.
Yes, indeed. I have been on it a few times, and it's a lot of fun.
Yes, you have. Come back anytime. Yes.
And you for this as well.
Oh my gosh, I would love to.
I'll have to get you back for like a 60s or 70s era.
Ooh, I would love that. Definitely.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The podcast is at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter. I'm on Instagram at @andtherunnerup_is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is, where you could hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And next week, we'll be talking about the Best Actress race of 1938. The nominees were Faye Bainter for White Banners, Bette Davis for Jezebel, Wendy Hiller for Pygmalion, Norma Shearer for Marie Antoinette, and Margaret Sullivan for Three Comrades, with the winner being Bette Davis, completing the bookend of Bette Davis winning in 1935, then two Luise Rainers in the middle, and then Bette Davis again in 1938. So that is what to watch before next week. Thank you again, Sophia.
Thank you so much, and everyone enjoy Bette Davis.
Yes. And with that, I will bid you all adieu.